Most people think the hardest part of investing is knowing when to buy, but history shows something very different. The hardest part is knowing when not to sell. And when it comes to XRP, there's a psychological trap that most people don't even realize they're walking toward. It's the moment where price feels big, the number looks life-changing, and emotion quietly takes control. That moment is where most people exit far earlier than they ever planned. Now, before we go any further, let me be very clear. This video is not financial advice. Nothing here is telling you to buy, sell, or hold any asset. This is an educational discussion about market psychology, behavior, and long-term thinking. Markets are risky, outcomes are uncertain, and everyone needs to make decisions based on their own situation. With that said, let's talk honestly. Imagine waking up one day and seeing XRP at a price that once felt impossible. The kind of price that makes screenshots worth saving. The kind of price that makes group chats explode. The kind of price that triggers headlines, emotions, and memories all at once. For many people, that moment won't feel like opportunity. It will feel like relief, and relief is one of the most dangerous emotions in any market. Relief makes people sell, not because it's smart, but because the pressure finally feels gone. Most people don't lose money because they were wrong about the asset. They lose money because they underestimated themselves. They underestimated how they would feel when numbers got big. They underestimated how fast fear would replace patience once profits felt real. When people hear a number like $1,000, the brain doesn't process it as a market price. It processes it as a finish line, a point of arrival, a moment where the story ends and the stress disappears. And that's exactly why so many people will sell there. Not because it's logical, but because it feels safe. But markets don't care about comfort. Markets move based on structure, incentives, liquidity, and time. They don't stop because a number sounds impressive. They don't pause because a milestone feels emotional, and they certainly don't reward everyone equally for waiting. This is where the real conversation begins. Most retail participants build plans in calm moments and break them in emotional ones. When price is low, they promise patience. When price rises, that promise gets tested. The higher it goes, the louder the internal voice becomes. The voice that says, "What if it drops?" The voice that says, "You've already won." The voice that says, "Don't get greedy." Greed gets blamed a lot in markets, but fear wears a smarter disguise. Fear often pretends to be wisdom. Selling because you're afraid of losing gains feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels like protecting yourself. But sometimes, it's just fear of uncertainty wearing a rational mask. The truth is, no one knows where XRP or any asset will go. Anyone who claims certainty is guessing. But what we do know is how human behavior repeats over and over again across every market cycle, across every asset class. People exit too early because they confuse emotional relief with strategic thinking. The idea that most people will sell at a big round number isn't a prediction, it's an observation. Round numbers anchor psychology. They feel complete, they feel final, and that's exactly why markets often move through them, not stop at them. This doesn't mean price will go higher. It means the decision to sell should be based on understanding, not emotion. XRP is especially interesting in this conversation because it's not built around hype cycles alone. It's designed, use case, and long-term discussions revolve around infrastructure, not excitement. Infrastructure doesn't get priced overnight. It gets absorbed slowly, often invisibly until it becomes necessary. That creates a mismatch between expectation and reality. People expect fireworks. Systems deliver integration. And that's why patience feels unrewarded right up until the moment it suddenly matters. Another mistake people make is assuming that future price action will feel obvious in the moment. It won't. If something truly changes structurally, it will feel uncomfortable first. It will feel uncertain. It will feel like you're holding longer than you should. That discomfort is not a signal to act. It's a signal to think. Before you even consider selling at any number, the real question isn't, how high is the price? The real question is, why do I own this in the first place? If the answer is short-term profit, then any number that satisfies that goal is valid. But if the answer is long-term belief in utility, infrastructure, or adoption, then selling purely because a number feels big may not align with your original reasoning, and this is where many people make the mistake they regret later, not because the market punished them, but because they acted against their own logic under emotional pressure. Now let's talk about something people don't like to admit. Many people don't actually want generational wealth. They want relief. They want the anxiety to stop. They want the waiting to end. They want the constant checking to be over. Selling provides that instantly, but relief is temporary. Regret can last much longer. This doesn't mean holding forever is the answer. It means understanding why your acting matters more than the action itself. If you're finding this perspective useful, take a second and hit the like button. It helps more people see grounded discussions instead of hype. And if you want more calm, policy-safe conversations about markets and psychology, make sure you're subscribed. Now here's where the suspense really begins. Most people assume the biggest challenge is reaching a high price. In reality, the biggest challenge is staying rational once you're there. Your environment will change. The voices around you will change. Media tone will change. Even your own self-image will change. You won't be the same person emotionally at higher prices as you are right now. That's why planning only based on numbers is incomplete. You have to plan for how you'll feel. This is part 1 of the story, the setup, the psychological groundwork. Because before price ever becomes a test, the real battle happens internally. And in the next part, we're going to talk about why markets are designed to test patience at exactly the moment people feel most confident, and why selling too early often feels like the right decision, right before it doesn't. And that moment, right before it doesn't, is where market psychology reveals its sharpest edge. By the time an asset reaches a level that feels unbelievable, the story around it has already changed. Early doubt has turned into cautious optimism. Cautious optimism has turned into confidence. And confidence slowly starts to harden into expectation. That's when people stop asking whether something can happen and start assuming that it should happen. That shift is subtle, but it's dangerous. Because markets don't punish doubt, they punish expectation. When XRP, or any asset, approaches a price that dominates headlines, attention explodes. Friends who never cared suddenly ask questions. Social feeds fill up with opinions. Analysts appear everywhere, each one more confident than the last. And confidence is contagious. At the same time, something else happens quietly. The original reasons people bought in begin to fade into the background. Utility, long-term infrastructure, macro context, all of it gets drowned out by one dominant thought. I don't want to mess this up. That thought feels responsible. It feels smart. It feels like maturity. But often it's just fear of regret trying to protect itself. One of the hardest truths in markets is this: the decision that feels safest emotionally is not always the decision that makes the most sense strategically. This is where many people misunderstand what smart money actually does. It's not smarter because it knows the future. It's smarter because it plans for uncertainty. It assumes volatility. It expects discomfort. And it doesn't need emotional closure at the first sign of success. Retail investors often think institutions exit at big round numbers. In reality, institutions rarely exit all at once. They scale. They rebalance. They adjust exposure based on risk models, not feelings. They don't see a number like $1,000 and think this is enough. They think, how does this fit into our broader allocation? That difference in mindset explains why retail behavior clusters so predictably around certain price levels. When large numbers of people decide emotionally that this is the top, liquidity forms. And where liquidity forms, markets move. Not because the price is wrong, but because behavior becomes predictable. This is why markets often move through the exact levels people expect to act as ceilings. It's not magic, it's mechanics. When too many participants plan the same action at the same level, that level stops functioning the way they expect. Another mistake people make is believing that selling early protects them from regret. In reality, it often just shifts the regret to a different form. Instead of regretting a loss, people regret missing what came next. And that regret is quieter, but it lasts longer. This doesn't mean holding forever is wise. It means exits should be intentional, not reactive. There's a huge difference between saying this aligns with my plan and saying this feels like enough. Markets don't care about enough, they care about structure. XRP structure is what makes this conversation especially important. It exists at the intersection of technology, finance, and regulation. Those systems don't reprice themselves overnight. They evolve slowly, then suddenly feel obvious in hindsight. When infrastructure adoption reaches a tipping point, price doesn't rise gently, it adjusts aggressively, and that adjustment rarely gives polite warning. People often imagine that if something significant is going to happen, they'll feel confident beforehand. hand, history shows the opposite. The most meaningful shifts often feel uncertain right up until they're undeniable. That's why waiting for certainty usually means arriving late. But again, this is not about predicting outcomes. It's about understanding behavior. Most people underestimate how much external pressure influences their decisions. News headlines, social media sentiment, influencer opinions, even silence can feel threatening. When everyone is talking, it's hard to think clearly. When everyone goes quiet, it's even harder. Silence gets interpreted as danger, even when nothing fundamental has changed. That's when people convince themselves they're being practical by exiting. But practicality without context is just reaction. Another factor people don't prepare for is identity shift. When an investment grows large, it stops being just an investment. It becomes part of how you see yourself. Letting go of it feels like closing a chapter. That emotional weight can rush decisions. This is why many experienced participants predefine behavior, not price. They decide how they will act under certain conditions long before emotion enters the picture. Not because they know what will happen, but because they know how humans behave under pressure. If you're watching this and thinking, I'll be different, understand this. Almost everyone thinks that. Very few actually are. Being different requires systems, not willpower. Willpower fails under stress. Systems don't. This is also where time horizon matters. Someone with a short-term goal experiences rising price as success. Someone with a long-term thesis experiences it as validation, but not completion. Neither is wrong, they're just different. Problems arise when people confuse the two. XRP attracts long-term narratives, global payments, liquidity bridges, institutional rails. Those narratives don't resolve at a single price point. They unfold over years. Trying to treat a long-term thesis with short-term emotional responses creates internal conflict. That conflict is exhausting, and exhaustion leads to shortcuts. Shortcuts lead to mistakes. If this kind of thinking resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed. These conversations don't promise outcomes, they build understanding. Now here's something that rarely gets talked about. Many people don't actually want to maximize outcomes. They want to minimize anxiety. And those are not the same goal. Minimizing anxiety often means exiting early. Maximizing outcomes often means tolerating discomfort longer than feels reasonable. The market rewards the second far more often than the first, but it never advertises that fact clearly. That's why hindsight always looks cleaner than reality. Looking back, charts look obvious. Living through them feels chaotic. People who succeed long term aren't immune to emotion. They've just learned to delay reaction, and delay is a skill. As price rises, pressure doesn't come from loss, it comes from gain. That's counterintuitive, but it's true. Gains create fear of giving back. Losses create fear of further loss. Both trigger reaction, but only one of them convinces you that exiting is smart. That's why so many people sell right before they plan to be patient. They don't break because they're wrong. They break because they're human. The market doesn't punish intelligence, it punishes unprepared emotion. This is why conversations like this matter before price ever reaches emotional levels. Once emotion takes over, logic struggles to compete. If you found value in this perspective so far, hit the like button. It helps keep thoughtful content visible in a sea of noise. Now, in the next part, we're going to talk about why big numbers don't end stories, why markets often move fastest after people think the move is done, and how misunderstanding scale leads people to underestimate what's even possible. Not guaranteed, but possible. Because the biggest mistake isn't selling at the wrong price, it's selling at the wrong reason. Because once people believe the story is finished, that's often when the most aggressive moves begin. Markets don't move in straight lines, but they do move in phases. Accumulation, expansion, distribution, and repricing. Most people only recognize the phase they're emotionally comfortable with. Accumulation feels boring, so they ignore it. Expansion feels exciting, so they chase it. Distribution feels confusing, so they misread it, and repricing feels impossible. Until it's already happened. The danger isn't that people don't know these phases exist. The danger is that they assume they'll recognize them in real time. They rarely do. When a price level becomes widely discussed as a final destination, that level stops being about valuation and starts being about psychology. It becomes a reference point, and reference points anchor behavior, not truth. $1,000 isn't a valuation model, it's It's a round number that feels complete. Humans love completion. We like stories with endings. We like conclusions. We like moments where we can say, that's it, I did well. Markets don't care about narrative satisfaction. They care about flow. If capital is still flowing, if infrastructure is still expanding, if adoption is still compounding, price doesn't stop just because the story feels finished to the crowd. It pauses, it breathes.